Listen carefully, because this is the part nobody likes to think about. You can stockpile food, batteries, matches, even solar panels. But if you don't secure water, none of it matters. People imagine water disappears only in deserts or in some Hollywood wasteland after the bombs drop. But the dark secret behind water shortages is much simpler, much uglier, and far closer to your home than you think. Water doesn't run out. Access does. And the moment access collapses, society collapses right behind it. You don't die of thirst on day 3. You die of the decisions you didn't make on day 0. Here's what almost no one realizes. Your tap isn't connected to nature. It's connected to electricity. Every liter that flows to your sink depends on pumps. Massive, tireless pumps that need a stable grid to survive. And that's the hidden flaw in modern civilization. Our water supply isn't fragile. It's electrically addicted. In a blackout, those pumps go silent. In an EMP, they don't even exist anymore. In a long collapse, even if the reservoir is full, the water is still trapped behind dozens of dead machines. You'll hear people say, "But my city has backup generators." Yes, for a few hours. Not for a few weeks. Not for a society-wide collapse, and absolutely not if fuel deliveries stop. That's when the panic begins, and the real shortage starts. Not because the earth is dry, but because the system holding your water hostage just died. You think bottled water will save people? It becomes a fight within 24 hours. I've seen groups go from polite shoppers to desperate competitors in one blackout afternoon. Supermarkets only have enough packaged water for maybe 2% of the local population for a short period. After that, you're not competing against thirst, you're competing against fear. Fear makes people hoard irrationally. Fear makes people raid trucks. Fear makes groups form around wells and natural springs like they're guarding gold mines. And fear makes your neighborhood suddenly realize water is no longer a convenience. It's a battlefield. That's the psychological collapse most people never see coming. So let's talk about the part you can control. The first brutal truth. If you wait to collect water until the tap stops, you're already late. You need to secure as much as you can while it's still flowing. Bathtubs, buckets, containers, even plastic bags inside laundry baskets. Anything that holds water suddenly becomes a life support system. This works because tap water is pressurized. The system holds residual pressure for minutes to hours after the grid fails. That last pressure flush is your free lifeline. Once it's gone for good, unless you can manually access a reservoir, which you can't. And no, you don't need to purify water coming directly from the tap in that first moment. Just store it cleanly in airtight containers to prevent contamination later. But storing isn't enough, and here's where most people make a deadly mistake. They assume clear water is safe water. It isn't. In a prolonged collapse, even stored water becomes a breeding ground. Warm temperatures, darkness, and time are the perfect recipe for microbial growth. That's why you need purification layered like armor: chemical, thermal, and mechanical. Chlorine works because it disrupts bacterial cell walls through oxidation, but it needs the right concentration. Boiling works because microorganisms can't handle temperatures above 100 degrees Celsius. Proteins literally unravel. Filtration works because physical barriers like activated carbon and microfilters trap pathogens and sediments. If you rely on only one method, you're gambling. If you combine them, you're surviving. Now let's say you missed the early window. No stored water, no tap, no system pressure. This is where people start doing reckless things. Drinking directly from rivers, stagnant ponds, even decorative fountains. You don't need a collapse to know that's a bad idea. You just need basic biology. Waterborne pathogens don't care about your hydration needs. Giardia, E. coli, Cryptosporidium, these microscopic parasites turn a desperate sip into days of dehydration and organ stress. And in a collapse, there are no hospitals waiting to pump you full of IV fluids. That's why moving water is always safer than still water. Flow disrupts microbial colonies and keeps oxygen circulating. The faster the flow, the lower the risk. And if you can collect from the top layer while avoiding sediment, even better. That's the difference between getting sick and staying functional. But even flowing water may not save you if your environment has industrial areas, farms, or runoff zones nearby. Chemical contamination doesn't care about boiling. Heavy metals don't evaporate out. Agricultural pesticides don't magically transform into vitamins. You can boil a river dry and still drink poison. So you need to understand watershed logic. Water flowing downhill carries everything above it. If there are farms upstream, expect nitrates. If there are factories, expect chemicals. If there's a city, expect sewage. That's why gaining the high ground, literally, is the survival strategy. Springs near elevated terrain or natural seepage from rock formations are your best bet. This isn't academic theory. This is real-world survival logic built on decades of field manuals and environmental science. And then there's rainwater. People imagine it's pure, like the sky just hands you bottled water for free. The truth: rain is cleanest only when collected directly as it falls. The moment it touches a roof, a gutter, or a dirty container, it becomes whatever that surface is coated with: bird droppings, dust, chemicals, mold spores. But here's the trick. Rainwater collected after the first few minutes of a storm is some of the safest emergency water you can get. The early rainfall washes the atmosphere and surfaces. Once that initial layer is flushed, open containers or clean tarps can collect surprisingly clean water. Still purify it, obviously, but it's one of the quickest renewable water sources in a prolonged crisis. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. Now, even if you're collecting water well, storing it can still kill you. Most people don't think about the materials they use. Old paint buckets? Toxic. Plastic containers that previously held detergent? Absolutely not. You need food-grade plastics or stainless steel. And you need to rotate stored water every 6 months under normal conditions. So imagine how much more attention it needs in a collapse. Exposure to heat speeds up chemical leaching from plastics. Exposure to light accelerates microbial bloom. Exposure to air lets in spores and dust. The best container is one you can seal completely, keep in the dark, and open only when necessary. The more still the water, the more you must treat it before drinking. Here's the final truth. Water isn't scarce. Reliable water is. And reliable water depends on systems you don't control. That's the secret nobody warns you about, because it forces people to admit how dependent they are. But once you understand that, once you stop trusting the faucet as your guardian angel, the power shifts back to you. Water is everywhere, locked in soil, captured in air, flowing underground, waiting in plants, drifting in fog. Humans survived millennia before plumbing existed. You just have to relearn what they knew, apply modern science, and stop assuming that civilization will always refill your glass for you. You'd be surprised how many people in a collapse die with water near them, just not usable water. That's the next layer of this secret. Most of the world's water isn't drinkable in its natural form, but with the right approach, you can turn almost any source into survival-grade hydration. The mistake people make is assuming purification is a single-step magic trick. It's not. It's a sequence, a dance. You take dirty, unpredictable nature and guide it towards something your body can tolerate. And if you don't do it correctly, your body becomes the filter, and trust me, that filter fails fast. So let's get into the real endgame skills, the ones people ignore until they're already dizzy, dehydrated, and making stupid decisions. The first technique that almost nobody uses, even though it can save lives, is solar disinfection. It sounds too simple to be real, like a survival myth, but it's backed by physics and microbiology. The UVA radiation in sunlight penetrates the DNA of bacteria, parasites, and viruses, scrambling their ability to replicate. If a microbe can't replicate, it can't infect you. Transparent bottles, PET bottles specifically, turn sunlight into a sterilizing weapon. 6 hours of full sun can do what a fire sometimes can't. especially if your fuel is limited. The trick is that the water must be clear enough for sunlight to pass through. Muddy water? Forget it. You need a pre-filter using cloth, sand, gravel, anything to remove turbidity. And no, this isn't a miracle cure for chemical contamination. It just handles the biological side. But in the wilderness or collapsed urban environments, that's often the part that kills you first. Another overlooked resource is humidity. Yeah, the air itself. People walk around complaining about moisture in the air, when that moisture could literally save their lives. Dew collection works because the temperature drops at night, and water vapor condenses onto cool surfaces. A sheet of plastic stretched over a bowl with a small stone weighing down the center can create a simple dew trap. Overnight, tiny droplets collect and slide down into the lowest point. It's not a fast method. You won't get liters. But if you set up multiple traps, night after night, it becomes a passive water farm that requires zero energy. And in survival, passive systems are gold because they work even when you're exhausted, injured, or hiding. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. But let's talk about the most brutal scenario. You find a large body of water, but it's brackish or salty. People think drinking salt water is better than nothing. No, drinking salt water accelerates dehydration so aggressively that you might as well pour it straight into your veins and call it a day. Your body tries to flush out excess salts, and in doing so, loses more water than you gained. But salt water isn't hopeless if you understand distillation. Distillation works not because it removes impurities, but because it separates boiling points. Water vapor rises. Salts and contaminants stay behind. If you trap that vapor, whether with a metal lid, a clean tarp, or even a makeshift spiral of tubing, you can collect condensed fresh water on the other end. Yes, it takes energy. Yes, it's slow. But it turns lethal water into life-saving hydration. And the best part? Distilled water has no pathogens, no metals, no sediments. It's as pure as it gets. Now I want to talk about something people rarely consider: plants. In a collapse, vegetation becomes more than scenery. Bamboo, banana trees, certain vines. These can hold or channel drinkable water. But here's the catch. You must know the species, because some plants contain toxic sap or latex-like fluids. The safe trick is this. Cut a living vine, hold the upper section downward, and observe. Clean water flows steadily and consistently. If it's milky, sticky, or smells strange, drop it. That's plant chemistry telling you to walk away. This isn't a method you rely on every day, but in humid, forested areas, it can keep you alive long enough to regroup. This section is based on practical field survival experience rather than formal academic sources. Let's move underground. A lot of people imagine groundwater as some mythical treasure hidden miles below the earth. In reality, near-surface groundwater can sit just a few feet down, especially in valleys, riverbeds, and low-lying depressions. If you dig into a dry riverbed, you're not digging for water in the dirt. You're digging toward the point where soil saturation becomes enough to squeeze water out. Line the hole with stones, let it settle, and the pool that forms at the bottom, once filtered and boiled, can be clean enough to drink. This technique works because water naturally migrates downward due to gravity, and riverbeds are pathways carved over thousands of years. Even when the river looks dead, the earth beneath it is still pulsing with moisture. You just need the patience to reach it. Now here's a dark truth that people don't want to acknowledge. During a societal collapse, contaminated water isn't just natural, it's man-made. When sanitation fails, waste disposal fails. Human waste ends up where it shouldn't, and that turns streams, ponds, even previously safe wells into microbial soup. That's why you never drink downstream of human activity. Always move higher, move earlier in the water flow, and always filter. The 3 water rules become sacred. Collect from the highest point, filter before storing, purify before drinking. High, filter, purify. Break that sequence and you invite everything from intestinal parasites to kidney-destroying bacteria. In a world without hospitals, Those aren't illnesses. They're death sentences delivered slowly. And finally, the psychological trap. Thirst kills your judgment before it kills your body. Your brain goes foggy, your patience evaporates, and suddenly you're taking stupid risks. Like drinking untested water just to end the agony for a moment. That's why water discipline is as important as water collection. Ration by activity, not by time. Drink when you need to function, conserve when you're resting. Taking small sips actually wastes water. Your body prefers full hydration cycles. And don't forget electrolyte balance. Pure water without salts leads to hyponatremia. Yes, you can die from too much clean water if you don't replenish minerals lost through sweat. A pinch of salt, a handful of clean leaves rich in minerals, or even a tiny mixture of sugar and salt can stabilize your system until you find safer sources. So here's the final layer of the secret. Water shortages aren't about the absence of water. They're about the absence of readiness. People don't plan. People don't learn. People don't respect how fast access collapses once the systems fall. But if you understand the science, the psychology, and the practical reality, you're already ahead of 90% of the population in a crisis. Water is everywhere for the person who knows how to look, how to purify, and how to stay calm when everyone else is panicking.